When I was a freshman in high school, my family was going through a difficult financial time. We had to move to a smaller apartment in Boston so that we could afford living in the area. So we moved into this really small apartment, and the building where the apartment was in was really bizarre because it didn't even really look like an apartment building. It was technically an office building. We were on the 3rd floor, and then on the 2nd floor was a small law office. And then the weirdest one on the bottom floor, which was really the basement of the building, was a massage parlor. None of the people who worked at the massage parlor spoke English. They were all young women, and the name of the parlor was Tulips Massage. Tulips, like the flower. Love those pink tulips. But it also most definitely had a double meaning. Like, she has 2 lips. So I was 14, and I would get home at like 3 and see these sketchy middle-aged men walking into the building. Nasty, dumpy, gross, sad men. One time I walked home into the building and there was this man standing at the entrance. And he gave me this weird look when I walked in, and I just ignored him and started walking up the stairs, and I could hear him walking up behind me. I thought, okay, maybe he's going to the law offices on the 2nd floor, but then he followed me up. So this man followed me up the stairs, and when I got to my apartment door, I turned around and I was like, what are you doing? He was like, I thought you were leading me to my massage. And I was like, ew, no, the massage parlor's in the basement. He was like, so you don't work here? And I was like, no. And this was the creepiest part. He goes, well, that's too bad. And then he walked away. So later that day, I go for a run. And other than our sketchy apartment building, the rest of the street was really residential and nice. One of our neighbors, Peter, was gardening out front. And he said hi, and he asked how I liked living in our new place, and I said it was fine. And then I asked if he knew anything about the massage parlor, and he didn't really answer my question, but responded in a really weird way. He was like, you know, a lot of people have been living on this street for a long time, and some are friends, and some aren't. And then he walked away, and I was like, whoa. Did Peter just explain to me how a neighborhood works? Obviously, Peter didn't answer my question at all, and I was still really creeped out by the massage parlor. Then a few days later, I was walking home from school, and all of a sudden I hear the sound of leaves crackling behind me, like the sound of footsteps. And I turn around, and it's the same man from the apartment building.
So my house is super fucking paranormal, and this is the first incident I had. So in 6th grade, I had 3 friends over, and we were playing hide and go seek. So I hid in the pantry, and there's no way anybody could hear me. There's no vents, and I wasn't even talking. So I'm sitting there like, because like I wanted to win the fuck. So I'm sitting in there, and 10 minutes pass, and I hear my friends talking downstairs. So I go down there, and I'm like, did y'all give up? And they look at me, they're like, we thought you were in the crawl space. I was like, no. They were like, no, we were literally talking to somebody in the crawl space. And they said, like, it was this little girl, like, asking for help and shit. So I get freaked out, and I'm, like, looking around. I'm like, what the fuck? And around 2 minutes later, the doorknob to the crawl space starts going like this, like, shaking and shit. So I literally had a heart attack, and I was like, okay, we're leaving. So we grabbed all of our shit, we grabbed my dog, and we went in front of the house. I called my dad crying. I was like, there's something in this fucking house. And he was like, no, the fuck there's not. So he gets home, he checks the house. He's like, y'all are stupid. Like, there's no shit here. But we all heard it, and we all saw the doorknob shake. And it only got worse from then.
Top 5. Okay, so around 2 summers ago, me and my sister were just chilling in our room watching YouTube. My dad was in his room watching TV. And me and my sister haven't left our room in like maybe 2 hours. We were about to go to bed. And then my dad just starts calling our name. He's like, Ashley, Kayla, get over here. I'm like, bro, what? So we go into his room, and he's like, which one of you just went into the kitchen? Me and my sister look at each other. We're like, none of us went in the kitchen. And he looks at us. He goes, yeah, one of you went into the kitchen. I know you did. And me and my sister look at each other, and we're like, we have been in our rooms the whole time. So my dad grabs his gun, and he looks around the house. There's nobody there. So I'm like, yo, what did you see? Like, what did you see? And he was like, I saw a tall black figure walk into the kitchen. Kind of like what I saw in my mirror. So I go back to my room, I shut my door, and I try to go to bed. Around 11 o'clock, everybody in my house got woken up to a huge shatter from downstairs. I got up, my heart was in my stomach because I thought someone broke in because it sounded like a window breaking. My dad grabs his gun, and we all go downstairs. And my lizard's 20-pound cage was on the floor broken.
My house has a huge glass window in the front of it that shines in moonlight at night. And a few nights after my dad saw the shadow figure, I had my friend Olivia come over to watch movies. It was around 9 o'clock at night, my dad's out at a bar. I'm over here making popcorn, and I hear my friend scream. So I go over to her, and she points out on the floor this shadow of somebody hanging from a noose swinging back and forth. I immediately start looking for something that could cause that shadow, but there was nothing. And every time you look at the floor, you'd see a shadow of somebody swinging back and forth on a noose. So my sister tries to calm us down and takes us down to the basement to watch a movie. Around 5 seconds later, the Alexa went off talking about a murder. So we run upstairs, we lock my door, and we just sit in there. My dad eventually got home, so we calmed down and we tried to go to bed. But around 3 hours later, my dog, who never barks, started barking at the wall. Tell me that shit ain't crazy, but as always, it gets worse. Storytime Tinder edition. Okay, the story blew up on Twitter like a while ago, but I'm just gonna retell it because it's very informational. So there was this guy and this girl, and they met through Tinder, and then they met up and they went on a date. And they were out at dinner, and then she starts not feeling so well. And then she says, I really need to go home. And he says, yeah, I'll drive you home. And she says, okay. So then they get to her house, and then she starts feeling better. So then she says, do you want to come in for some coffee? And then he says, yeah, sure. So they go inside, they have their coffee, and then she doesn't feel well again. And she's like, oh, I'm sorry, I don't feel well again. I think you really need to leave. And he's like, okay. And he leaves. And then she goes to bed, and in the middle of the night, she wakes up, and she hears this noise down in her kitchen. And so she locks her door, and she calls the cops. And the 911 operator is just on the other line saying, can you just stay on the line until the cops get there? And then the cops get there, and they're like, the door is locked. Like, we don't think anyone's inside. And she's like, I promise you, someone's inside my house. I can hear them. She says, you have my permission to break down the door. So she's still up in her room, and then she hears the cops break down the door. And then she hears some wrestling and some fighting. Part two of the Tinder story. So then after the cops break down the door, they go upstairs and they knock on her door, and they're like, it's okay, we've got the guy, everything's fine. And they say to her, we don't really want you to stay here tonight. We don't think that you should see what he's done. And when I say he, it's the guy that she went on a date with. And she's like, no, I need to see what he's done. So she goes downstairs and she sees her kitchen wrapped all in plastic, and there's a saw and a hammer and a knife. And earlier when he came into her house for coffee, he set his keys down right next to her keys. And so when he left, he picked up both sets of keys. And that is how he got back into her house. And they tested her, like her blood and everything, and she wasn't supposed to wake up because of how many drugs were in her system, because on the date he drugged her. And then I guess he was just planning on chopping up her body in her own kitchen. I don't know. Stay safe.
My house has a huge glass window in the front of it that shines in moonlight at night. And a few nights after my dad saw the shadow figure, I had my friend Olivia come over to watch movies. It's around 9 o'clock at night, my dad's out at a bar. I'm over here making popcorn, and I hear my friend scream. So I go over to her, and she points out on the floor the shadow of somebody hanging from a noose swinging back and forth. I immediately start looking for something that could cause that shadow, but there was nothing. And every time you look at the floor, you'd see a shadow of somebody swinging back and forth on a noose. So my sister tries to calm us down and takes us down to the basement to watch a movie. Around 5 seconds later, the Alexa went off talking about a murder. So we run upstairs, we lock my door, and we just sit in there. My dad eventually got home, so we calmed down and we tried to go to bed. But around 3 hours later, my dog, who never barks, started barking at the wall. Tell me that shit ain't crazy, but as always, it gets worse.
Okay, this one isn't long, but it definitely adds to the paranormal. So this one time I was hanging out with this kid, and I was out like an hour past my curfew, but I didn't really care because I thought my dad was asleep. So I pull up to my house, and this kid's like, your dad's awake. I was like, there's no way he's awake. He has to get up at 3 a.m. and it's 10 p.m. He's like, no, I just saw someone standing outside the window and walk away. So I'm like, okay, great, I'm gonna get my ass beat. So I go inside, I'm ready to get yelled at, and I don't see my dad. So I go into his room, and this man is passed out snoring. So I was a little freaked out because my dad was asleep, so who did he see? So it's either a man living in my attic, or it might be a little ghost.
So one night I was getting ready to go to bed. And for some reason, I've never had this feeling before in my life. I was so hungry, I couldn't even keep my eyes closed. And I was like, okay, wow, I didn't know I was that hungry. So I go out to the kitchen, and I'm getting some snacks. And I always check the front door because it's low-key glass, so I always see if somebody's standing out there because I'm a little paranoid bitch. And of course, this one time, there is somebody standing outside my front door at 12 a.m. And guess who it was? It was my schizophrenic neighbor, Ralph. So as soon as I see him, I run behind my fridge because it blocks me from the front door. And I keep peeking over there, and he's literally just fucking standing there. And this man would not move. So I'm still sitting behind the fridge, and my door has a thing, it's a digital thing, so you could hear the deet, 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 deet when someone's trying to get in. So I was like, oh, fucking great, my neighbor's trying to break into my house. So he keeps trying to get the code right for about 2 minutes, and then eventually I just hear nothing. So I peer back around, and he is completely fucking gone. And he didn't come back for the rest of the night, but it only gets...
Top 5. Okay, so around 2 summers ago, me and my sister were just chilling in our room watching YouTube. My dad was in his room watching TV. And me and my sister haven't left our room in maybe 2 hours. We were about to go to bed. And then my dad just starts calling our name. He's like, Ashley, Kayla, get over here. I'm like, bro, what? So we go into his room, and he's like, which one of you just went into the kitchen? Me and my sister look at each other, we're like, none of us went in the kitchen. And he looks at us, he goes, yeah, one of you went into the kitchen, I know you did. And me and my sister look at each other and we're like, we have been in our rooms the whole time. So my dad grabs his gun and he looks around the house. There's nobody there. So I'm like, yo, what did you see? Like, what did you see? And he was like, I saw a tall black figure walk into the kitchen. Kind of like what I saw in my mirror. So I go back to my room, I shut my door, and I try to go to bed. Around 11 o'clock, everybody in my house got woken up to a huge shatter from downstairs. I got up, my heart was in my stomach because I thought someone broke in because it sounded like a window breaking. My dad grabs his gun and we all go downstairs. And my lizard's 20-pound cage was on the floor broken.
Yes, this really did happen. In 2015, a man woke up to a strange post-it note sitting on his desk. On it was a to-do list that he didn't recognize in handwriting that didn't look like his. Since he was up late the night before doing some work, he assumed he must have written out the list when he was half asleep and kind of forgot about it, so he just crumples it up and throws it away. 2 weeks later, he wakes up to dozens of these post-it notes all over his wall, and they're all blank except for one that, in the same weird handwriting, says, "Our landlord isn't letting me talk to you." Now feeling totally freaked out that some crazy person is crawling around his apartment at night, he starts looking for signs of a break-in, but there aren't any. Instead of calling the police, he shares his experience on Reddit asking for help, and one user's comment literally saves his life. Turns out the man was writing the notes to himself and then forgetting because his brain was slowly dying due to a carbon monoxide leak that was only discovered because a user suggested he install a detector. If someone offers you this, walk away. In 2016, a man was staying at his friend's cabin in the woods when he decided to go for an evening stroll. A little ways down the trail, he hears someone call out from behind his neighbor's house. He looks up and he sees this skinny guy pop out from behind the building who starts waving frantically at him to come over. Worried this guy could be in trouble, the man takes off running to assist. But when he gets close enough, the neighbor just offers him a fistful of Slim Jims and starts talking about how much he hates his wife. Sensing there was something wrong with this guy, he says no thank you to the Slim Jims and walks away. The next day, the man calls his friend who owned the cabin to ask him what the deal was with his weirdo neighbor. There was silence on the phone, and then his friend just says, "I don't have any neighbors." The police are called, and it turns out his neighbor was really some lunatic who had recently killed his wife and had been hiding out in the abandoned cabin next door.